What's up, everybody? It's Ant from Ant's Late Night Show, and we're here in Fall River, Massachusetts at the Lizzie Borden house. We're about to explore, take a tour of the house, and see what's going on in here. I was born and raised here my whole life. Been wondering what's inside this house, what the mystery is behind going inside the house, staying in the house, and let's just check out what's going on. Follow me in here, gang.
All right, so welcome to the Lizzie Borden house. You're entering a crime scene. This house is the scene of two brutal murders. On August 4th of 1892, Mr. Andrew J. Borden and his second wife, Abby Durfee Gray Borden, were both hatcheted to death here in this house. Now, it's been 133 years. Andrew's youngest daughter, Lizzie, she was accused of these crimes. She was tried, and she was acquitted. But to this day, a lot of people still believe that Lizzie committed those crimes. Now, what do you guys think? Do you think Lizzie did it?
Ooh, that's...
Depends on what was going on with
So you're going to wait until we're done to formulate your opinion.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that very much, because what a lot of people find is when they come into this house, they learn things that they didn't know before. And a lot of people leave this tour with a different opinion than the one they came in with. So hopefully you're going to learn something today too. Maybe you'll change your mind. Maybe you'll still be undecided. But the most important thing is that we have a good time today. So without any further ado, allow me to tell you the story of what happened here in this house on that day. Mr. Borden had been out and about that Thursday morning doing his normal weekday routine, picking up the mail, going to the bank. But he returned early because he wasn't feeling very well that morning. So he decided he would take a nap on the sofa before lunch. He came in the house, and his dutiful daughter, Lizzie Borden, helped her father get comfortable on the couch. And then, once she was sure he was fine for his nap, she went out to the barn. Lizzie was looking for sinkers for her fishing line, and on the way into the barn, she picked herself a couple of pairs. So while in the barn, she never did find anything to use for sinkers for her fishing lines, but she decided to stay in that barn and eat her pears. She says it took her about 20 minutes or so. When she returned to the house, through the side door, she walked through the dining room around the corner and discovered the murdered remains of her father on the sofa. Of course, she screamed and ran to the back stairs. She called up for the maid, Bridget, who was also napping at that time on the third floor. Bridget came down when Lizzie screamed for her, and she was sent across the street to go fetch the family doctor, Dr. Bowen. So Bridget runs across the street, but she discovers upon arrival that Dr. Bowen is out on house calls. So she leaves a message for him to come as soon as he returns, and she comes back to Lizzie. At that point, Lizzie sends her to go get Alice Russell. Alice Russell is Lizzie's best friend. She doesn't want to be alone in the house. Now, she doesn't send Bridget to go next door and get the doctor that lives there or the doctor that lives in the house behind. No. I want my bestie. I don't want to be alone in the house. So off Bridget goes to go get Alice Russell. And Lizzie is standing at the side door. There used to be a screen door on the side, and she's standing just inside the screen. And she's visibly agitated. She's like wringing her hands and pulling at her dress. And she has attracted the attention of the next door neighbor who lives over here. Her name is Mrs. Churchill, Mrs. Adelaide Churchill. Now, she's a little bit of a curtain twitcher, if you know what I mean. She's been looking out her window. She sees Bridget running back and forth. She knows something's up. So she calls over to Lizzie. She says, "Lizzie, what's happened?" And Lizzie replies, "Oh, Mrs. Churchill, do come over. Someone has killed Father." So Mrs. Churchill comes over. She likes her tea hot, you know what I mean? So she comes over. She wants to see if she can help Lizzie in any way. But before she does, she takes a little mental note. Mrs. Churchill notices right away that Lizzie is perfectly clean from head to toe. There's not a spot on her and not a hair out of place. This will be important later on because Mrs. Churchill is going to testify in Lizzie's defense. But now, she just wants to be helpful. So she runs across the street to see if she can get somebody to call the police. She finds a gentleman who runs into the paint store, and they call the police. And they say, "You got to come quick. There's some kind of trouble at the Borden house." Well, that attracts the attention of everyone within earshot. Now there's a lot of curiosity going on. People are like, "Trouble at the Borden house? Let's go see what's up." Now people are crossing the street. They're coming onto the property. It's starting to get a little busy around here. And then Dr. Bowen, he gets the message that he's needed. He shows up. Bridget comes back with Alice Russell. There's a lot of activity, but not any police presence yet. It takes about 25 minutes or so for the Fall River Police Department to respond to that phone call. And the reason for that delayed response was because August 4th of 1892 also happened to be the day of the Fall River Police Department annual picnic.
Oh, wow.
2/3 of the police force were out of town, an hour away in Warwick, Rhode Island. Now, what's even more interesting about that is the fact that they had printed that in the paper. Several days prior, they had put an ad in the paper stating that response times might be delayed on the 4th of August because of that picnic. And I can tell you that was the last time they ever did that. Well, they're here now, though, and they're taking control of the situation. And once somebody hears a panicked voice from the kitchen say, "Wait a minute, where's Mrs. Borden?" Well, Lizzie answers that question. She launches into a story that she had just told her father about an hour ago. She said, "Oh, Mrs. Borden, she received a note early this morning from a sick friend, and she's been called away." I'm going to pause right here. The timeline of the morning. We are going to return to that spot. But what I want to do is I want to give you a little background. I want to tell you a story that might help explain, depending on what you think, what led up to the events of that day. And I'm going to tell that story in the dining room. So come on.
Look at gang, it's Andrew Borden.
Mr. and Mrs. Borden, they're having breakfast here the morning of the murders. Bridget serves breakfast at about 7:15. But they actually had a house guest. There was a third person at the breakfast table, Mr. John Binnicum Morse. Mr. Morse, or Uncle John, as we call him here in the house, he's Andrew's brother-in-law by way of his first marriage to Lizzie and Emma's mother. So he's Lizzie and Emma's maternal uncle. So he was in town the day before on business, and he stopped by to say hello, and he was invited to spend the night in the guest room on the second floor. So he accepted that invitation, and that's why we find him here at the breakfast table that morning. Missing from the breakfast table are Lizzie and Emma, Andrew's adult daughters. Emma, who's 41 at the time of the murders, she's actually out of town. She's been staying with family friends in Fairhaven for 2 weeks. Lizzie, on the other hand, is at home, but she's upstairs in her room. The fact is, Lizzie and Emma haven't been dining with the elder Bordens for about 5 years. Their stepmother did something in 1887 that drove a wedge between the sisters and their stepmother, and that was to ask Mr. Borden to buy her a house. Back in 1887, Abby's half-sister was living in a house on 4th Street that was being sold out from under her, and she had nowhere to go. So Abby asked Andrew to buy that house. She said, "Why don't you buy the 4th Street house, and you can put it in my name, and that way I can just let my sister to continue to live there." Well, surprisingly, Andrew agreed to this. He bought the house, he put it in Abby's name, and then Lizzie and Emma found out, and they were not happy. This is a grand financial gesture on the part of their father, who doesn't do grand financial gestures. He's never done anything like this for his daughters. So they're mad. Emma in particular, she says to her father, "What you do for her, you should do for your own flesh and blood." Well, it seems like Andrew gets the message, because his very next real estate transaction of record was to give his daughters the Ferry Street house. That's his father's house. So his boyhood home, he transferred ownership of that house to his daughters, and he's thinking, maybe things can get back to normal around here. He was wrong. Lizzie and Emma will continue to hold this grudge against their stepmother for having the nerve to ask their father to buy her property until the day she dies. They refuse to dine with her. They pretty much give up speaking to her unless they are directly addressed. And Lizzie, who's called Abby mother since she was 4 years old, now starts calling her Mrs. Borden. So that gives you kind of an idea of the atmosphere that permeated this household for the 5 years leading up to the murders. It was brought up during the coroner's inquest. Lizzie was asked about her relationship with her stepmother. She reported that it was cordial. But then when she was asked why she calls her Mrs. Borden, if they have such a cordial relationship, she does reference the real estate transaction. So while it is not held up as a motive in and of itself, it is definitely addressed during the investigation. Now, as I said, Lizzie also claims that this was the spot of her alibi. She says she was in this dining room ironing handkerchiefs at the time that Abby was being murdered that morning. The problem we have with that is not whether or not she would have been ironing handkerchiefs in this room. It's the fact that nobody saw her in here. She certainly would do this chore here in this room. She would warm her irons on the stove in the kitchen. But the only other person who was home at the time never saw her in here. That was Bridget. And the reason she didn't see her was because Bridget was outside. She was washing windows at that time. Fortunately for Bridget, she had a witness. She had a nice little chat with the maid from next door, but nobody saw Lizzie in here. And now finally, I mentioned autopsies. Okay, it's sort of interesting. My mother, when I was growing up, told me, like, there are certain things you don't talk about around the dining room table. Pretty sure autopsies would have made that list. Yeah. But how can you avoid it when Mrs. Borden's autopsy took place right here in this room? Oh, wow. So Mr. Borden's body was lowered from the sofa in the sitting room onto the floor. Well, not the floor per se, onto something like you see here hanging on the wall. That's a coroner's board. So they lowered him onto a coroner's board. You can see right here, they placed him on the floor next to the sofa. And you can see the coroner's board under his body in the photograph, right? See it right there as well. And then, of course, you can see the damage to poor Mr. Borden's face. Just to give you an idea, bloody rags right here. This is his arm, his shoulder, his neck. That's an ear. And this is his beard. Holy shit. Yeah, definitely. Wow. But Mrs. Borden, she was brought down from the second floor and brought into this room. And of course, she was going to be laid out on a coroner's board as well. Well, if you look around the dining room, where's the best place for the coroner's board? Right on the dining room table. So this autopsy, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it when we get into the front parlor. But I do want you to know, just so you can rest assured, this is not the table. In fact, none of the furniture in the house.
I was just going to ask. I was actually going to ask. I was going to
be
like, wow, you guys kept it in amazing
really
condition.
You'd be amazed how many people would be standing here, like, touching it or leaning on it. And then I say, Mrs. Borden's autopsy. And then, like, do that. It's hilarious. No, Lizzie and Emma, when they moved out in 1893, they put all their furniture into storage. And unfortunately, those storage units subsequently became flooded and all the original furniture was lost. So we have decorated the house with antiques and some reproductions, as well as some props, just to give the house the look and feel that it would have had on that day. We've been able to use crime scene photographs as well to replicate things like wallpaper and carpeting and things like that. That's pretty cool. So, yeah. So real quick, before we head into the parlor, everybody always wants to get a nice close-up look at our skulls. So these are lovely replicas of Andrew and Abby's skulls next to photographs of the actual skulls. So on the left, we have Andrew. And on the right, we have Abby. I'm going to talk more detail about the skulls when we reach the third floor. But for now, we're going to make our way into the front parlor. Once you're done.
Yo, gang. Took his face off, gang.
So this is the front parlor. The front parlor would be, in any Victorian home, it would be your nicest room. You have your nicest furniture, your best lamps, because this is the room that you would entertain in. So there is a story about some people who came to visit in this room. But before I get to that, I want to talk about these autopsies. Now, you saw the damage to Mr. Borden, okay? He was struck 10 to 11 times. The left side of his face was completely obliterated. His eye socket was split in half. His nose was practically severed from his face. It was bad. But they decided to have autopsies to rule out poisoning. Okay, why would they do that? Because of him. So this gentleman, his name is Eli Bentz. He works at a drugstore, an apothecary on South Main Street. And as soon as he heard what happened to the Bordens, he wants to talk to the police because he says that the day before the murders, Lizzie Borden came into his shop and attempted to purchase 10 cents worth of prussic acid. Now, prussic acid is a deadly poison, but Lizzie claimed she just needed it to clean her sealskin cape. Well, he said, I don't really care what you need it for. You have to have a doctor's note in order to purchase it. And according to him, she said, well, I've bought it here before without one. I don't really need it. And he said, not from me, you haven't. And he sent her on her way. So he never sells Lizzie the poison. Poison is never found in the stomach contents of the victims. So it kind of makes the whole story pointless in a way, but not to the lead prosecutor, Mr. Hosea Knowlton. He's actually the district attorney of the city of Fall River at the time, and he will become, as I said, the lead prosecutor. He feels like this story shows premeditation on Lizzie's part, because you have to understand, during the 19th century, poisoning was very much considered to be a woman's crime. So her just trying to get her hands on some poison, in his opinion, makes it look like she's up to no good. So he definitely wants this story told. So Mr. Bentz testifies at the coroner's inquest and then again at the pretrial hearing. But when they get to Lizzie's trial, the judge deems the story inadmissible, and he does not testify. the jury never hears the prussic acid story. So, one of many instances that may have affected the outcome of the trial. But like I said, we'll talk about that later. For now, I do want to tell you about that visit. So on the evening of the 6th is now 2 days after the murders, it's Saturday, and the funerals have actually taken place earlier in the day. But about 8 o'clock that evening, these two gentlemen came to call. On the left, you have Rufus Hilliard. He was the city marshal at the time. Today, we might say chief of police. And on the right, we have the mayor, Mayor John Coughlin. So the mayor accompanies the city marshal to the Borden's home. They are escorted here into the parlor where Lizzie and Emma are sitting. And it is here in this room that Lizzie is informed that she is in fact the suspect in the murder of her father and her stepmother. She's not arrested at that time, but she is told kind of like, just don't go anywhere. And she's also told that she has to testify at the coroner's inquest. The inquest begins on Tuesday the 9th. Lizzie testifies on the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th. Upon the completion of her testimony on the 11th, that's when Lizzie is finally arrested. Now, they take her to jail, but they take her to jail in Taunton, Massachusetts. And you guys are local, so you know it's not exactly next town over. It was actually kind of inconvenient for Emma, who wanted to visit her sister every day. But they had to take her to Taunton because the jail here in Fall River did not have any facilities for women. So off she goes to await her trial. And it's a long wait. It's 10 months before her trial begins in June of 1893. So right now, I want to return to that spot in the timeline where we left off, where Lizzie has just explained that Mrs. Borden was called away with a note from a sick friend, but then she kind of stops herself and she goes, oh, but you know what? I'm pretty sure I heard footsteps coming from the second floor. She must have come home. Somebody's got to go and tell her what's happened. And she looks right at Bridget. Bridget's not having it. Bridget flatly refuses to go upstairs because she's thinking if there's somebody walking around up there, it's probably the person that did that to Mr. Borden. So she refuses. She says, oh, no, I'm not going. But we can always count on good old Mrs. Churchill. She's like, I'll go with you, Bridget. And she leads the way to the front stairs. So here's what's happening next. So Mrs. Churchill is leading the way to see if they can find Mrs. Borden on the second floor. And she just so happens, when she gets to the 8th step, she just happens to glance to her left across that landing and into the guest bedroom. And that's how she finds Mrs. Borden on the second floor. So when you get to that 8th step, have a glance to your left and see if you can't find her as well.
Oh. 8th step. And that is, wow, that is it. You can see it right from that 8th step. Clear view.
Yep. So, poor Mrs. Borden, that is exactly how she was found. So Mrs. Churchill sees the body. She screams. She runs back downstairs. And eventually Dr. Bowen comes up. He determines, yes, of course, she's dead. But he sees something that causes him to suspect that these murders did not take place at the same time. He sees the pool of blood around her head is already coagulating. The blood in Andrew's wounds is still pretty wet and fresh. So immediately Dr. Bowen thinks there's got to be a time difference between these murders. Well, he was right. Once they process the results from the official autopsies, they also interview witnesses who saw the movements of the victims that morning. It's determined that there is roughly a 90-minute difference between these murders, which means Mrs. Borden was killed at about 9:30, because we know Andrew was killed just before 11. So at 9:30, Mrs. Borden was up here in the guest bedroom making up the bed because Uncle John had spent the night here the night before, and she was attacked while she was performing that chore. Now, Abby suffered a blow to the left side of her head, above her ear. She had a blow between her shoulder blades, which was actually quite significant. It was about 3 inches deep. And then the remaining 17 blows were to the back of her head and the back of her neck. Now, I'm not really very good at math, but I know enough to know that all adds up to 19 blows.
That's right.
Not 40.
So wow, that is definitely some news to hear.
Yes.
You know, all throughout my childhood growing up, it was the Lizzie Borden 40 and 41
Lizzie Borden
nursery
took an
rhyme.
axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. it's full of lies.
Wow. Wow.
Because, I mean, obviously, it's not even her mother, right? It's her
Yes.
stepmother.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, though, that particular rhyme was written almost immediately. Like, she was being taunted with that chant, like, before a year was up.
Wow.
So it's really kind of crazy. So, but 19 is still a significant amount of blows. It might not be 40, but it's a lot.
Yes.
And so we can use the time frame that we've established to sort of eliminate some of our suspects. So obviously Emma is eliminated because she's out of town. And Mr. Borden, he was at his office at 9:30. Let's see, Bridget was outside washing windows at that time and has a witness. Lizzie may or may not have been ironing those handkerchiefs. But where was Uncle John? So Uncle John hangs on the wall right there behind you. And he's kind of like evidence of what would happen if Will Ferrell and Abe Lincoln ever got
I was
together.
just gonna say he's given
Wow,
Abe
yeah, that's-
Lincoln.
Yeah. So where was he? Well, he's actually pretty easy to establish. Uncle John and Andrew had decided they were going to meet back here at the house for lunch. They both had things to do that morning, but they wanted to get back together and continue talking about some business. So at 8:45, Uncle John leaves the house. He goes down to the post office where he mails a letter, and then he walks over to Waybosset Street. He has a niece and nephew from out west that are visiting for the summer, and he wants to go visit them. So he walks over to Waybosset Street. He arrives at the Emery's house, that's where he's headed, at 9:20, and he's there for 2 hours. So the 2 hours that he's at the Emery home are the 2 hours that completely encompass the two crimes. So he has an airtight alibi. Now, he gets on the streetcar at 11:20. He comes back to the house. He doesn't even notice that things are kind of out of place, like the people that are milling around in front of the house. He says he didn't even notice that. He went into the backyard. He picked a couple of pears, and he first notices that something's wrong when he's heading to the side door, and there's a guard stationed at the side door. So that's when he asks what happened. He's told that Mr. and Mrs. Borden had been murdered, and he was just devastated. I mean, that was his brother-in-law. He's known him for so many years. He goes into the house, he finds Lizzie, and the first thing he asks her is, "My God, how could this have happened?" Now, what's interesting about Uncle John is he's not a suspect in the eyes of the law, but there were some people in the city that suspected him of being the murderer. And we think it's largely because he was from out of town, and people knew that he used to be a butcher. So, but we do know that he has that alibi, so he is not indeed a suspect.
They thought he could have been good with the axe there.
Exactly, and all that blood wouldn't have bothered him, you know. All right, so we're gonna go over to Lizzie and Emma's rooms. All right, so this is Lizzie's bedroom at the time of the murders, but for the first 18 years that they lived in this house, this was Emma's room, and Lizzie has this little tiny bedroom off to the side. But in 1890, Lizzie went on an extended tour of Europe. And when she returned, she had some souvenirs with her. And Emma felt like her sister would want to put those things out to remind her of her trip. There's really not a whole lot of room to do that in that room. So it was Emma who suggested to Lizzie that they switch rooms. And Lizzie gratefully accepted her sister's offer. This is typical behavior of Emma. This photograph of Emma is from just a few years before the murder, so she's like in her late 30s in this photo. And then we have this photo of Emma from when she was a little girl. So this photo of Emma is with her birth mother. So that is Sarah Morse Borden, Lizzie and Emma's mom. And I do love that this photo is in this room with this picture of Lizzie. Because with this picture of Lizzie and this picture of Sarah, you can really tell how much they looked like each other. Yeah. Well, Mrs. Borden, Sarah, passed away when Emma was 12 and Lizzie was only 2. And on her deathbed, she asked Emma to make a promise to always look after baby Lizzie. And Emma promised that she would. So throughout her lifetime, these instances of putting Lizzie's comfort ahead of her own was part of her keeping that promise to her mother. Now, for 2 years, from the time her mother passed away until the time her father remarried, Emma acts as Lizzie's primary caretaker and maternal figure. So they develop a very, very close bond during that time. Now, Andrew marries Abby. Lizzie is now 4, Emma's 14, and does not like her stepmother. Emma was very close with her mother, loved her very much. She kind of resents seeing another woman stepping into her mother's role in the family. And she's not happy about being replaced as Lizzie's caretaker. So from the very beginning, she does not like Abby, and she doesn't try to hide the fact. As a matter of fact, she would have been expected to call her mother, but she did not. She called her by her Christian name, which was pretty sassy for a 14-year-old back then. But Lizzie, on the other hand, she didn't even remember her birth mother. So she has no problem accepting Abby into the family. They actually develop a pretty normal, cordial stepmother-stepdaughter relationship. They get along pretty well. I mean, she still continues to go to Emma for certain aspects of being mothered, but for the most part, their relationship is perfectly fine right up until that real estate transaction takes place in 87. I do want to talk a little bit more about Abby, but to do that, we'll go in her room. Now, in this room, we have another one of those little bedrooms off to the side. But the time the Bordens were living here, that was not a bedroom. That was actually Abby's dressing room. We've turned it into a bedroom for the purposes of the bed and breakfast. Yeah. So this is Andrew and Abby's room, and you can see over here on the dresser, we have Andrew. Somebody keeps moving him. I want him to be like right in the middle, like he doesn't prefer one wife over the other. There we go. So we have Andrew flanked by his wives. That is Sarah on the left and Abby on the right. Andrew and Sarah got married on Christmas night of 1845. And we know from historical documents that are left behind that their marriage was one that was founded in true affection. He loved her very much. Unfortunately, Sarah passes away in 1863. And 2 years later, he marries Abby Durfee Gray. Now, we don't know anything about whether or not their relationship was founded in any genuine affection for one another, but we do know that they both benefited from this relationship. At the time that Andrew proposed, Abby was a 37-year-old spinster living at home with her father, who had recently remarried a much younger woman. Her stepmother was only 14 months older than her. Awkward. And they had a baby. So she has a 2-year-old half-sister running around the house. At 37 years old, that might have been easy to say goodbye to once you were proposed to by someone. So she leaves that home. She comes and makes a home with Andrew. The other attractive notion of marrying Andrew for Abby would have been his wealth. He was a very wealthy man, certainly not amongst the richest in the city, but he was a very well-known businessman, very well respected, and marrying him would give her financial security that she would not have by staying at home with her family. Her family was constantly skirting financial disaster. She leaves that behind by marrying Andrew and setting herself up for a very secure financial future. Mr. Borden, at the time of his death, was worth about $350,000, which today that equals about $12 million. Wow. So he was in good shape. Yeah. Plus, we all know, well, most of us know, that not only did he make a lot of money, but he didn't spend it. So, you know, that's very secure. Now, as far as Andrew, what can he get out of marrying Abby? Well, his number one concern would have been a mother for his daughters. So he gets someone that he knows is morally upstanding because he met her in church to raise his daughters. He also gets a woman to run the household, which is just really a glorified housekeeper back then. And he does have the added benefit of Abby had very gracious hospitality. She was a lovely woman, and he did a lot of business in the house. So it was the added benefit of having her there to provide that warm hospitality to his business associates, making them feel relaxed and at home. So they both get something out of this marriage. Whether or not they started out with or developed feelings for one another, we don't know. But we do know that they were married for almost 28 years at the time of the murders. If you decide to come back and spend the night, please make sure you bring some pocket change.
Okay? I just had a question about.
Yeah, I was just seeing
every room has a little cup with like pennies in it and change in it.
Yep. So we provide these for our overnight guests. This is their opportunity to pay Andrew for the privilege of staying in his house.
Oh, wow.
Now, some people call it ghost insurance. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's simply a way to tell Andrew, in a language he totally understands, that you appreciate his house and you're grateful that you get to stay here. Now, we have had the opportunity, or the circumstance where some people forgot or just didn't leave change and then regretted it. So every once in a while, we get money in the mail. This lady said that she didn't have her pocketbook with her at the time that she was packing up, so she didn't leave change. And then once they left, everything that could possibly go wrong did. So she popped 5 dimes in an envelope. She writes, "Please forgive me," and asked that we put it in a house for her. Just a couple of weeks ago, we received a couple of quarters with a note that said, "Please tell Andrew I'm sorry about what I said about the furniture." None of the tour guides ever heard anybody say anything bad about the furniture, but we have that downstairs in the sitting room for Andrew. And every once in a while, we also find out in other ways that people didn't leave money and things went wrong for them. There's a TikTok video out there of a young lady who stayed here back in April or May, I believe, and she didn't leave any change. She checked out in the morning. She drove up to Salem to spend the day. She tripped on a curb and broke her leg.
Wow.
Yeah. So make sure you bring that change with you when you come to stay. All right, let's head up to the 3rd floor.
Mr. Borden ain't playing, gang. You heard that. Mr. Borden ain't playing. Come and stay in his house, you gotta drop something.
So, first of all, I just want to explain that we're in the attic. Okay, we've got it all dressed up nice, but back when the Bordens lived here, it was just bare wood floors, no curtains on the windows, that sort of thing. This was Bridget's room. And we have 2 rooms over here that the Bordens used for storage that we've converted into bedrooms. And then this room that is bathroom today was a small bedroom as well. So this was a sort of like a half-finished bedroom, and that is where Uncle John slept after the murders. He actually stayed on with Emma for quite a while, but obviously he can't stay in the guest room anymore. It's a crime scene, so he stays in this room.
Oh, wow.
Now, so let me talk about Bridget. Bridget was 26 years old at the time of the murders. She had come over from Ireland when she was 17. She worked for families in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island before she ended up here in Fall River, and she was working for the Bordens for 2 years and 9 months at the time of the murders. Now, poor Bridget, she thought she was going to get arrested. She figured she was number 1 suspect because she has 2 major strikes against her. First of all, she's a domestic, and second of all, she's Irish. There's really not much worse you could be in Fall River at that time. But fortunately for Bridget, what she didn't know was that half of the Fall River Police Department was Irish, so they weren't holding that against her. And as far as where she was at the time, her alibis, they were witnessed. Marshal Hilliard knows that she has good witnesses for her alibis, so he never even considers her a suspect. But she does have to testify. She's the first witness to testify at the coroner's inquest on Tuesday the 9th. She was very nervous. But they said she did a good job. They said she was very forthcoming and truthful in her answers. So when she's done testifying, she gets driven home in a carriage by one of the officers. And when they get here to the house, she asks him to wait for her. And she comes up here to the 3rd floor, she gathers her belongings, and she leaves this house forever on that day. Never sets foot in this house again. She has the driver take her over to Division Street, where she stays with a cousin until the trial. Now, after the trial, we actually lose track of Bridget for a little bit, about 5 years, where we can't exactly pinpoint where she is. But in 1898, we find Bridget living and working in Anaconda, Montana. So she puts a good deal of real estate between herself and Fall River, and she spends the rest of her life there. She does get married in 1905. She does not have any children, and she passed away at the age of 82 in 1948. So she outlives both of the sisters.
Oh, wow.
Now, we were very fortunate. About 13 years ago, some relatives of hers came through the house, and they gave us some photographs of her from later in her life. So when you go into Bridget's room, on your right-hand side, you're going to see a photograph of Bridget by herself and one of her and her husband in their later years. So make sure you check that out. She's kind of looks a little bit like Mrs. Doubtfire. So cute. So now I want to talk a little bit about the trial. So we have some photographs over here that are relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So on that top shelf, once again, we see those skull photos, Andrew on the left and Abby on the right. And in between the photos is a photograph of the hatchet head, or the handleless hatchet, that was found here in the house, actually in the basement, on the 3rd search of the house, on Monday the 8th. It was found in a box on a shelf in the wood room of the basement, and it was immediately suspected to be the murder weapon. Based partly in the manner in which it was found, just like tossed into a box like that, but also because of that break in the handle. It was felt that the break in the handle was relatively fresh, and that if the murderer had gotten blood on the handle, which they certainly would have, they would want to get rid of that evidence, because you can't get blood out of wood. So, very much suspicious of this. They have it tested, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depending on which side you're on, they were never able to prove that it was the murder weapon. There was no sign of human hair or human blood anywhere on it. So, it's not proven to be the murder weapon. There were 2 other hatchets recovered from the basement as well that were also not able to be proven to be the murder weapon. Again, no trace of human hair or human blood. One of them did have hair on it, but it was revealed to be the hair of a cow. So, they bring the hatchet head into the courtroom anyway. They bring the hatchet head into the courtroom and they lay it on the prosecution's table. It's going to come into play at some point. Now, you folks are pretty young. If I say, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, I know what that is.
You know what that is.
Yes, that's
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson.
The O.J. Simpson trial, right? So the O.J. Simpson trial, that whole, the bloody glove and all of that, the courtroom theatrics, right? I have to tell you that those kind of theatrics existed long before Johnny Cochran was even born. And we have evidence of that in this trial. And it's funny because they did refer to the O.J. Simpson trial as the trial of the century, as was this trial. So they do bear some similarities. So the courtroom theatrics to which I refer have to do with that hatchet head and those skulls. Now, did you wonder for a moment how Mr. and Mrs. Borden's skulls even came to be liberated from their bodies? Like, what are we doing with the skulls of the murder victims? I'm going to tell you. They got away with stuff back then that we could never ever do today. So after the initial autopsy, which was really just about removing the stomachs from the victims to determine whether or not they were poisoned, the Attorney General, Mr. Pillsbury, he was not happy with those results. He wants a more thorough, traditional autopsy performed on these bodies. But he doesn't want Lizzie and Emma to know about it. So, in order for that to happen, they have to wait until after the funerals, because the bodies are here in the house until the funerals. So this is what they did. Back then, Victorian era, when you go to the graveside at a funeral, first of all, the ladies don't even get out of the carriages, but the families leave before they lower the caskets into the ground, because back then it was considered too shocking to see your loved one buried into the ground. So when the carriages drove away, instead of lowering those caskets, they put them back on the hearse, and they drove them to a holding tomb at the Oak Grove Cemetery, where they sat for 5 days. On the 5th day, which was actually the 1 week of the murders, the August 11th, the Bristol County Medical Examiner, Dr. Dolan, who had performed the initial autopsy, he comes to the cemetery with an associate, Dr. Draper, that bearded gentleman right there. Yep, he's the Suffolk County Medical Examiner, and he's also an instructor at Harvard Medical School. So he accompanies Dr. Dolan to the cemetery, and one by one, they have the 2 bodies moved from the holding tomb to the ladies' comfort station, where they then perform what is considered to be the official autopsies. So all of the wounds are measured and cataloged, all of the organs are examined, and yes, they shave the back of Mrs. Borden's head so that they can accurately count and measure all her wounds. So this autopsy takes place, and then Dr. Dolan, he's been instructed to preserve the skulls. So he takes out his trusty bone saw and he removes the heads from the victims. He then takes them back to his house, and according to his son, he boils them in the family lobster pots in the basement of the house in order to remove all the cartilage and flesh, etc., to properly preserve the skulls. So once he does that, he wraps them up and he sends them up to Harvard with his friend Dr. Draper. Now they are examined. Spoiler alert, they don't learn anything new from examining the skulls, which leads a lot of people to believe that that was a ruse, that they really wanted possession of the skulls so they could present them in court. And that is, of course, what they did. Well, the first attempt to present them in court failed because Lizzie fainted upon seeing her father's skull, so they had to kind of put a stop to it. But a couple days later, they had her in a small room off the side of the courtroom where she could still hear the proceedings but not have to see what was going on. And they successfully presented these skulls in front of the jury. Now, it was pretty grisly. Dr. Draper is assisting Dr. Dolan, and he's picking the skulls up one at a time with one hand, and with his other hand, he picks up that hatchet head, and he's placing the blade of the hatchet in and out of the gaping wounds in the skulls of the victims. Now, he says that he's doing this simply to prove that this hatchet, or one very much like it,
fit.
could be the murder weapon. Exactly. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, look at the gaping wound in Abby's skull. There's many more things besides a hatchet that you could.
Yeah.
Right. So it's generally believed that this was a theatrical demonstration to shock the jury and perhaps even to bring them over to the side of the prosecution, just to demonstrate the sheer brutality and gruesomeness of the crime. Well, it did affect them. They reported in the paper the next day that several of the jurors went rather pale during that demonstration, but it did not affect them in the way that was intended, if that was in fact the intention, because of course we know that they came back with that not guilty verdict. And regardless of what anyone may think about what really happened in this house on that day, that verdict was the right verdict for the case that was presented to the jury. It doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that's what happened. But the case has no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, no bloody evidence that ties Lizzie to the crime. There is nothing other than the fact that she was home at the time and that she didn't like her stepmother that is considered evidence against her. It's a very flimsy case. So really that not guilty verdict, as is agreed upon by legal experts for over a century now, it was the right verdict. There were missteps throughout the investigation, including things like Lizzie's inquest testimony was not admissible in court because she had been denied counsel. Her lawyer was not allowed to be present when she testified at the inquest, and they said that she didn't need one, but it turns out that legally she was supposed to have him there or could have had him there, and they denied her that. So her testimony was inadmissible. And I don't know if you folks have ever read Lizzie's inquest testimony. It's pretty damning. She contradicts herself constantly. She doesn't seem to know where she was at certain times. It's interesting. Very interesting.
So do you believe that's like something that would have changed things today if it was really presented?
Absolutely, absolutely. It raises so many questions. And then, of course, during the time that she was testifying at the inquest, she was also under the influence of morphine. So Dr. Bowen, the family doctor, he was giving her morphine, and he said it was to calm her nerves the first day that he administered it, the day after the murders. But on Saturday, he actually doubled that dose, and throughout the entire time she was testifying at the inquest, she was under the influence of a heavy narcotic. So that also could have influenced the content of her testimony. So very interesting stuff. So we have this not guilty verdict. We're going to go down to the kitchen. We're going to talk about what happens after the verdict. But before we do, I'm going to let you guys go in and out of these rooms. And then when you come out of that room, make that your last one. I'm going to tell you one more thing before we go downstairs.
It's so interesting because people also say, put the blame on like the maid as well, which when you explain it, there could not be a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she was outside with a witness during Abby's murder, and she was up here napping. Lizzie was her witness for the second murder.
So this right here, she definitely does look like Miss Doubtfire.
All I can see is Robin Williams for some reason.
Yeah. So Mr. Jennings right here, and got a nice space here, and there is also a little crawl space here too. Oh, this is very very neat. Check this out, gang. So if you were here, back then, and you're in the attic, right? You can get literally the front view, street view, like right here. You see everything right in front of you, which right in front now is the courthouse. But wow, that is super interesting. This is it though for the people in my generation here in Fall River, the kids of my generation. We've always wondered what was in here. What was really going on. The people that haven't really tapped in to see or really get to stay here. But huge mystery, and we definitely just uncovered the nursery rhyme. The number of blows wasn't accurate. You know what I mean? So wow, this is real interesting in here.
Oh my god, I used to love that book.
Yeah, this room.
That was my book when I was a kid.
This room is very, very, very Very interesting here. You notice that there's like dolls and then there's the markings on the.
Yeah, on the ceilings and stuff.
An axe.
An axe. Oh yeah, and the cubes. An axe. It says it right there.
Yeah, this is what they be talking about. Wow, that room was very different. It was we seen like the dolls and then the markings on the wall there.
Yeah. So you notice there's toys and dolls and stuffed
Yeah, and it
animals
says
and
an
things.
axe in the blocks.
Yeah. So the reason why there's toys in that room, so we know why we have overnight guests who leave coins for Mr. Borden. Well, we also have overnight guests who leave toys in that room because that room is haunted by the spirits of 2 children who were actually murdered in the house next door, almost 50 years before our Borden murders take place. And I say our Borden murders because those kids were Bordens as well. So in the 1840s. Lodwick and Eliza Borden are living in the house next door.
Are they related? Oh.
Lodwick was Andrew's uncle. So his aunt and uncle are living in that house. Now, of course, the Bordens aren't even here yet. They live in that house in the 1840s. They have 3 children. In 1848, Eliza finds herself with 3 children under the age of 5. What happens in this story, when we look back on it through the lens of modern medicine, is presumed to be because Eliza was suffering from postpartum depression. So on May 10th of 1848, Eliza took her 2 youngest children down into the basement of that house and drowned them in the cistern. And then she walked around the backside of the chimney and she slit her own throat with her husband's razor.
Wow.
So Eliza and her 2 youngest children perished in that house on that day. Her oldest child, Maria, was spared. We're not really sure why. Some accounts have her not being home that day. So they've come over to this house, and we're not really sure why. People over the years have come up with all these theories that they're attracted to Abby's spirit as a maternal figure, or they find this familiar because the house is decorated in a more period fashion. We don't really care what the reason is. We're just happy that they're here. So our guests do bring toys for Holder and Eliza Ann to play with.
Wow, this is a big kitchen.
This is a big kitchen.
So it's a big kitchen and it's modern, right? We keep this kitchen modern because we do prepare food here. We have, obviously, we have overnight guests, so we serve breakfast to our overnight guests. We also do events throughout the year that involve food, and right now we're doing our Victorian murder history dinner. I've actually already been cooking today. It is a nice 4-course meal that's prepared here in the house and then served in the dining room. And you're hosted by Emma Borden, Lizzie Borden, and Uncle John. It's a really fun event. We have that on Friday and Saturday nights all through the summer and fall.
That's awesome.
Oh wow, that's
Are
great.
you guys open like year round?
Yes,
Okay.
we're closed on Christmas and Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if you guys like close when it gets like.
Yeah, it gets a little slow in like Christmas, like after Christmas break is over, because Christmas break it picks up. Like January and February were pretty slow.
Okay.
But you still have people come into the house, you still give you a couple tours a week.
When people do overnights, is it just like one like group
Nope.
at it? Oh, okay. So
No,
it's
we have
multiple.
6 units that
Oh,
can be
okay.
rented out. So
Okay.
the guest room, the murder room,
Uh-huh.
is one. The Lizzie and Emma suite is rented out as one. The Andrew and Abby suite is rented out as one. And then
Okay.
the 3 rooms upstairs are separate.
Okay.
So we do have a lot of people though who will book the whole house. Particularly like just last week we had a bachelorette and they rented out the whole house. We've had weddings here, all kinds of family reunions. But you know, if you just, most people it's like the novelty of staying in the house. They just spend one night and say I slept at the Lizzie Borden house kind of thing. But I noticed you admiring our stove.
Yeah.
So this is very similar to what the Bordens would have had. What the Bordens did have is actually in that photograph. That's the actual Borden stove. So you can kind of see that the one that we have is very similar. They're, I'd say, separated by model year, probably by about 10 or 12 years. But it was pretty much, you know.
I've never seen a stove like this like in person.
Yeah, and you can see like it was a wood burning stove.
that's
Like
cool how
we
the
have it
wood-
outfitted for gas because for a while they actually used it, but it was a wood burning stove. So those are the gas pilots. So I like the kitchen as a spot to sort of reflect on what happened next. So when the verdict was read in court, Lizzie was so overwhelmed that she wept openly. They said that she was so stoic. They referred to her as the Sphinx. But here, when she hears the verdict, she shows emotion and she weeps in court. She turns to Emma and says, "Please take me home. I want to go to the old place." So Emma brings her home the next day. And they're not here for very long. First of all, the first thing that Emma does is she hands over half of the inheritance. Emma has inherited her father's fortune because he didn't have a will. And Emma is his next of kin, so she inherits everything. But we all know that Emma takes care of baby Lizzie, so she shares that inheritance with her sister. Now, the verdict was late June actually, June 20th. By the first week of September, they are moving into this house. This is the house on the hill. Now, you guys are locals, so you know that the hill. Yes, Maplecroft. Yeah, you know your stuff. So the hill, as you guys know, is the nickname for the Highlands district here in the city, right? It is where the wealthy folks live. It is where the wealthy folks lived. Oh, it kind of still is, right? In some areas. Big homes, modern appointments, bathrooms. Can you imagine Lizzie in the clawfoot bathtub for the first time? Like, that must have been heaven. But this is where they always wanted to live. Like, their father was never interested in the trappings of his wealth. He was perfectly happy living down here below his means in this little neighborhood. But they wanted to be in the seat of Fall River society, and so that's where they went. They lived there together until 1905. In 1905, Emma moves out. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding this rift between the sisters. Emma moves out. A lot of people place the blame on the fact that Lizzie starts associating with theater people. She started hanging out with some actors and actresses from a theater troupe that was touring New England at the time. She actually even threw a big party for them at Maplecroft. She had live music and champagne and all of this, and Emma didn't really approve of that kind of a relationship because theater people were not the celebrities that they are today. They were kind of like one step above being criminals. So for her to be having these people in her home was pretty scandalous. And there was also, there was a coachman that Lizzie had hired that Emma was very uncomfortable with. So some of these circumstances, however they came together, resulted in Emma moving out in 1905. And the sisters actually never spoke again. Right, for 22 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So Lizzie continues to live at Maplecroft. Emma moved to Providence, and she moved around a little bit, but she eventually settles in Newmarket, New Hampshire. But this is the only known photograph of Lizzie at Maplecroft. On her lap is one of her beloved Boston Terriers. She had 3 of them, and she loved animals. She also had a black cat named Blackie, and she had a canary named Gary. Gary Owen, the canary. She really did love animals. They were buried in the backyard of Maplecroft, but in her will, she left provisions that they should be exhumed and buried in the Pine Grove Pet Cemetery in Dedham, Massachusetts. So this is their headstone, and you can see she gave them all first and middle names. Lizzie was shunned by the people that she used to associate with, people that from church, people from the charities that she used to volunteer with, but she was very fond of her servants. Her servants and their families kind of became like her family. She treated their children very well. She doted on them. In fact, she gave them presents at Christmas and on their birthdays. She sent them on little trips like to the circus and the zoo. She even put several of them through college, including a medical doctor and an architect.
Wow.
They loved her. They called her Auntie Borden. So that really was the closest thing she had to family surrounding her at the time of her death. Lizzie passed away on June 1st of 1927 at the age of 66. And in a very strange turn of events, Emma passed away just 9 days later in Newmarket, New Hampshire. So they are 9 years apart in birth and 9 days apart in death.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Right?
That's crazy.
I kind of get goosebumps every time I say that.
Yeah.
Now, have you
that's-
guys been out to the cemetery yet?
Yes.
Yeah, we,
So you've seen Andrew's monument,
Yep.
and you
Yes.
know that this lucky guy, he's got a wife on either side of him, right?
Yes.
And Lizzie is buried at his feet. That was actually her request. In her will, she asked to be buried at her father's feet. Now, I'm sure you saw, because you were out there, her marker doesn't say Lizzie. It says Lizbeth. She changed her name. During that period of time when she was partying with the theater people, she changed her name to Lizbeth because she thought it sounded more sophisticated.
So all throughout everything, even after everything happened, she just stood in Fall River.
Mm-hmm. Her philosophy was, I'm not guilty, so why should I leave?
Wow.
Yeah. The people of Fall River weren't crazy about the fact that she didn't leave, because Fall River became, and still is, associated with
Her.
With Lizzie Borden.
murders. Yeah. She has one really cool legacy. She and her sister both, as I said, loved animals. You guys are probably familiar with the Faxon Animal League, right? The animal shelter. Well, it was actually founded by friends of Lizzie's back in the early 1900s as the Fall River Animal Rescue League. And both Lizzie and Emma left large sums of money. Lizzie left $30,000, Emma left $20,000 to the Animal Rescue League. They put that money in trust. They're still operating off of that money to this day.
Wow.
Back then, that's a lot of money.
It is a
That
huge
was a
amount
Yeah,
of
that's a
money.
lot of money back
It's
then.
about $300,000.
Yeah.
So if you ever go into the Faxon Animal Rescue League, in the lobby, they have portraits of Lizzie and Emma.
Wow, that is
That's cool.
yeah, it's amazing.
A lot of people have trouble reconciling, like, the person that she was in her later life with this
The
supposed
negative
yeah.
connotation that comes, yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes.
This was cool.
I do have a question. So, do you have any stories like that? Anything that happened to you that was a little weird that
Yes,
happened in the house?
I do. A couple of things specifically that happen all the time. Footsteps on the stairs, particularly the basement stairs. I was in the basement giving a tour just the other day, and I heard somebody coming down the stairs, and I poked my head around the corner to see who it was, and there's nobody there. But you can very clearly hear the footsteps. You hear people talking in another room, and there's nobody in there. You turn on a light, and you know you turned it on, and it's off. That happened to me just yesterday. But those are like the little things that happen all the time, and when you start working here, you get used to it really quick. But every once in a while, something over the top will happen. This happened to me back in, I want to say it was February. I was in the Lizzie and Emma room, and I was standing next to that little nightstand that has the photograph of Emma and her mother on it. And I was talking to my guests, and I felt something smack into my thigh. And I looked down, and one of the doors of that little nightstand had come flying open and smacked me. It wasn't like it creaked open and it just tapped me. It really, like, there was some force behind it. So I'm like, whatever, I work in a haunted house. So I just reached down and I closed it, and then I kept talking. And about 15 seconds later, the same thing happened. I was like, all right. So I reached down, I closed it, but this time I kept my hand there. And I kept talking, and in about 15 seconds, I feel it being pushed back at me from the other side. So now, I grabbed one of my guests, because we don't play like that in this house. We don't do jump scares, we don't fabricate anything. And so I grabbed one of my guests, and I had her put her hand there, and she had it there like a second, and she was like, oh my God. Like, yeah, so things like that happen every once in a while. The other thing that's kind of cool is one of the previous owners of the house would occasionally stay overnight in the second floor of the gift shop. She had a bed set up there and a hot plate. And I remember one day I came in, and the whole gift shop smelled like instant chicken noodle soup. Like the chicken noodle soup you can buy the packets and you add the hot water. It just smelled like it was cooking right there in that room. And I said to my fellow tour guide, I was like, why does it smell like Lipton chicken noodle soup in here? And he's like, that's so funny. And he mentioned to me that when she was staying up there, that former owner of the house, she used to make that.
Wow.
All the time. She passed away in 2021.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You know, and it's kind of like you know, they say like the energy just like stays around. You know, the people that have been around. You know, and you know all of Fall River kind of is just really. You know, they're really suspicious about this whole mystery. You know what I mean? Being born and raised in Fall River, I grew up my whole life just like wondering what happened here.
And you probably will go the rest of your life wondering what happened here, because I honestly believe we are never going to find out. But the fact is, I mean, if they haven't figured it out now, 133 years later, chances are we're never going to know.
I had another question too. So as you know, as a kid, I remember going on a field trip to the Fall River Historical Museum on Rock Street.
Yes.
Is there anything from the house that's over there?
Yes, they have quite an extensive Borden collection, and unfortunately, they're closed. They're probably not going to reopen till the spring of next year. They have the hatchet head.
Wow.
They own that hatchet head. They have the bedding from the guest bed with the blood spatter on it from when Mrs. Borden was attacked. They also have, Mrs. Borden wore a false braid, so you know, like you'd wear a hairpiece. Yeah. So she wore a false braid, and it came off of her head during the attack. It was found on the bed. So they have that. Wow. They also have numerous documents. They have a whole collection from Andrew Jennings, who was the Borden family lawyer, of diary entries, notes from the trial, all that kind of stuff. One of Lizzie's lockets they own. So yeah, they have an extensive Borden collection. I'm dying for them to reopen so I can get over there. But we have made good friends with, I have made good friends with a young man who is writing a new musical. He lives in New York. He's writing a new musical. It's called Borden, a musical. And he actually got an appointment with Michael Martins from the Historical Society about 3 weeks ago. And he got to see the hatchet head like in person.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And he took lots of pictures and then came over here and showed me.
Yeah, because I remember being there. They have so much cool, neat stuff in that house there, but it's just, I remember seeing something I just didn't remember.
Yeah, yeah.
The energy I feel, entering the house,
Yeah,
you
when
definitely
I came in,
feel
I felt
it.
a heavy.
Yeah,
I
you
literally
definitely
felt like
feel
a heavy
it.
energy. Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
I did. But that reminds me, because like when I went to where the Twin Towers were in New York, and you feel that it's like the same. Like it's just very heavy.
Yeah. Well, you notice I told you the story of the children being murdered. I didn't tell you that story in the room where they hang out, right? I get funky energy when I go in that room and I tell the story.
I was
like,
about
I
to
don't
say.
feel well.
I caught something on camera, and he's gonna have to replay. I'm gonna probably send it to you guys too. But when we were up there, I felt like a scratch on my back. Like when we were talking in the attic, when we just came out of that room, and then like.
All right, so I'm gonna let you guys out,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna give you each a copy of my card.
Yes.
If you have any other questions, if anything
Thank
occurs
you
to
so
you,
much.
feel free to send me an email. And
I wish I had change on me.
oh, it's okay. You're not spending the night, so you're good. Just also, if you loved the experience or you think other people might like the experience, feel free to scan one of those QR codes and leave me a little review.
Yeah. So guys, that's it. We literally went through the whole house, and gang, you need to come show up and check out the house for yourself, because the energy is real. I was born and raised here my whole life, and definitely an experience for me, for Jody, for Haley who was with us, and it was just definitely a whole experience. I hope you enjoy the video. I hope you come down to Fall River if you're not from here to come check out the Lizzie Borden house. It's one of the most talked about things when Fall River's brought up, and when you're here, like I said, you can feel the energy. So come through and take a tour for yourself, and come check out Megan too. Shout out to Megan.